So we're back now. We just saved you guys about 40 minutes of grinding on the 100 grit, and right now it has 0 chips coming across. So we have a clean edge at 100 grit, and we've been just taking off the burr on the backside with the 400 grit diamond stone. So this edge or this particular Emerson knife is at 20 degrees on the main bevel side, and then because it is essentially a modified chisel grind, on the backside we're using the wicked edge at 13 degrees just to clean off the burr. So you have a 13 degree on the backside and you have 20 degree on the primary. So as you see, the way I switched it now, I'm at 200 grit, and we're gonna continue finishing this up at 200 grit and then work our way up through the stones. So if you notice, I'm only doing a back and forth motion on one side, and I'm not using both paddles one after the other like you would normally do. The reason for that is because it's a chisel grind. So there's only, the secondary bevel is really only on this side of the knife. So I'm only grinding on one side of the knife. So the back and forth motion works really well for that. On this side of the knife, I am simply making a very light pass to clean up the burr that builds up. And that's it. Once the burr's gone and you can feel it with your finger, you're back to grinding on the secondary bevel. So as you grind on this side, the metal folds over. This side picks up and knocks off that metal you folded over. It was a lot more obvious when we were taking off a whole lot of material on the 100 grit. Right now, the goal on the 200 grit is just to get a pretty even 200 grit grind on it. This knife is not a show knife. This is definitely a user. So if I end up with some 100 grit or 200 grit marks left over when I'm done, it's not the end of the world. That's also why the show edge is so difficult. When you're doing a show edge, you need to make sure that with the 200 you erase every single 100 grit scratch. When you go to the 400, you got to make sure you erased every 200 grit scratch. When you go to the 600, you got to make sure you erased every 400 grit scratch, and so on and so forth until you get to the end. If you weren't meticulous about it, one of those deeper scratches will show through the mirror polish and you won't have a show finish. To get that show finish with 0 scratches on it, it takes time. You have to make sure that you're consistent throughout and that you don't leave any scratches from the previous stone. So right now we're going to continue working a little bit more with the 200 grit and then work our way up through the rest of them. So you just saw the lights flicker, and I had a power outage in the middle of the video. Not ideal, but we will continue working through, and there goes the power kicking back on. Yep. So unfortunately, gotta love our Florida Power and Light. Not sure what happened, but we just had a small power outage. That's why the lights flickered, and we are working right through it. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with what I see, and I'm gonna move on to the 400 and 600 grit stone. For those of you wondering why we work through so many stones, right now we're at 400 grit. So I don't like to leave a knife less than 600 grit. At 400 grit, if we were to just finish out, it is still razor sharp. It doesn't have as refined an edge as I'd like, but at 400 grit it's plenty sharp. 100 and 200 are pretty rough, but the way we work this edge and the way we work every edge that we do, we made sure that on the 100 we got rid of all the nicks and we were fully apexed. So what does that mean? We created a burr grinding from this side, so the metal was folded over on that side, and we removed the burr on the back side. So that knife was fully apexed, the knife was fully sharp at 100 grit. We took it to 200 grit, further refining that edge, and it was apexed, continues to be apexed, and it was sharp at 200 grit. At 400, it's all right, it's decent, but 600 is where we would leave our standard sharpening. Then once we move up from 600, at that point, it's not that we're making the knife sharp anymore because it's sharp at 600. It's now the mirror polishing. So 800 and 1000 already get a certain amount of polish to them, and they are more refined edges. So as we keep going up, we're basically getting finer and finer scratches, less and less undulations at the blade. At 800 and 1000, you need a microscope to see those undulations, and moving forward from there, you need a microscope. Then I take it to 1500 grit diamonds, and I start on lapping stones. The lapping stones are 9, 6, and 3 micron. After the 3 micron lapping films, I'm sorry, I said stones. After the 3 micron lapping films, we jump to strops. We go to a 4 micron and 2 micron strop, and that's usually where we stop. If we want to do a show finish, we'll go to 1.5 micron, and I can drop down to a 0.5 micron. Again, at that point, it's all show. It's all to get that mirrored edge. It's all for the aesthetics, and there's not really too much functionality beyond 2 micron. It's all getting a really, really popping mirrored edge. You could argue that there's no functionality past 1000 grit. But basically what we're doing is getting a really refined edge, and it's a really sharp edge. So my wicked edge stones are pretty worn in from a lot of use, as I do this for a living. Granted, and my blade is not a full-time job, it's a side job, but we sharpen quite a bit of knives on a regular basis. So you can't really see the numbers on my stones anymore. They've kind of worn out. The yellow is 400, the green is 600. Up until now, I've been working the secondary bevel with the numbers I've been telling you, and then cleaning up the burr on the other side with a 400 grit. So I'm gonna keep working the 400 grit until I'm happy with it on this side. The moment I switch on this side to 600 grit, I will start switching on this side to 600 grit. And then as I work up, this side will mirror this side. So although I'm only cleaning the burr on this backside, I'm gonna polish that backside just like I polished this side. Obviously, this dimension from edge to the cut, which is hard to see right now, but this will be a much bigger bevel because it's intended to be. This backside will be tiny. You won't be able to see the polish as much, but all we did is clean up the burr on that side. At this point, I'm happy with that 400 grit cut. We're switching to 600 grit. From now on, the process will go a little bit faster. As the scratches get finer and finer, it becomes a little bit easier to cut through them. And again, this is a utility knife, so I'm not trying to get a flawless show finish. I'm simply trying to get a razor sharp edge that's also mirrored and looks good. So I know earlier I said the mirroring is purely aesthetic. Depending on how you use the knife and what you cut through, I've found that my mirrored edges, or knives with the mirrored edge on them, tend to last a lot longer sharp, and simply need a little ceramic hone to touch up rather than having to sharpen them over and over again. I found, at least in my use of the knives, that the factory edges wear out a lot faster, and for some reason the mirrored edges seem to hold an edge a little bit longer. Granted, I'm careful and try not to chip my knives and cut. I try to use my knives for what they're meant for and not use them for what they're not meant for. So although my knives open plenty of boxes, if the box has metal clips, I will use a box cutter. Basically use the right tool for the right job. Now, knives, especially certain knives, are meant to be hard used tools, and there's nothing wrong with using them and occasionally abusing them, because that's what they're designed to do. But I've noticed that the mirrored edges tend to hold an edge longer, stay sharp longer, and it does look cool. Okay. So you'll notice me feeling the blade on the backside. What I'm feeling for is a burr. And then when you see me wipe the blade, I'm just trying to get rid of the metal filings from what we just cut. It's also parts of the diamond stone that stay out. So I'm trying to see a clean metal and see where I'm at. You'll also notice I move pretty quick around the blade. It's a lot of practice and a lot of confidence in myself, knowing I'm not going to get cut. I do eventually, or every once in a while, cut myself, slip up and move. You gotta remember, when you have a knife on a vise like this, it's obviously sharp at this point. So this is a perfectly sharp edge at 600 grit that I can turn over to this client and he'd be happy with. We're gonna take it to a mirror anyways, but just something to keep in mind. You'll see me go really fast around the blade, but I'm used to doing it, and I'm still human, and occasionally I do cut myself. So the two blue stones on this rod are 800 grit and 1000 grit. I moved up from the 400, 600, and like I said, I swapped out both sets. So now when we go 800 on this side, we go 800 on this side, 1000, 1000, so on and so forth. Another thing to note as I'm working on a chisel grind knife and doing this back and forth motion, I'm not counting. Usually when I work on a regular flat bevel on either side, I count strokes. So it's 1 and 1 on each side, and I'll usually do 25 to 50 strokes, stop, check my work, see where I'm at, 25 to 50 strokes, stop, check my work, see where I'm at, and so on and so forth. Right now, I'm going based on feel because it's a chisel grind and I can't go 1 and 1. I mean, I can, but the idea is not to create a big burr, a big bevel on this side and move the blade edge over. It's supposed to be a chisel grind, so you're supposed to keep only one side clean on this side, one side clean on this side. So we do much fewer strokes on this side and at much lighter pressure just to clean that burr off and then get back to work on this side. Switching to 1,000. So I don't know how much you can see on the video. You should already be able to see as I move off and the light hits it different, that the bevel's already reflective, so it's already somewhat polished. It does not look anywhere near what we would normally issue out because I don't normally stop at 1,000. This edge is a little bit rougher because we had to go down to 100 grit to remove all that material and get rid of all the chips and get to where we were going. Again, if I would have done 100 grit on a show finish, it'd take like 4 hours to get through all the scratches and make sure there wasn't a single scratch left at the end. But this is not a show finish, this is a utility finish. So we did a reasonable job of getting rid of the 100 scratches, reasonable job of getting rid of the 200 scratches, reasonable job of getting rid of the 400 scratches, and worked our way up from there. 600 up, it's not too bad, but just realize if there was a 100, 200, or 400 grit scratch left, once you switch to 600, you're not getting it out. It would take a ridiculous amount of time to get it out with a 600 grit stone. And as you keep moving from there, the 800 will erase the 600, but it's not going to erase whatever's left behind from before. The 1,000 will erase the 800, but it's not going to erase whatever was left there before. So you get the picture. If there's a 200 or 400 grit scratch at this point, it's there for the duration. So something worth noting, those scratches don't affect the performance of the sharpness at all. Again, at this point, we're already just getting a more and more refined edge, and to a certain extent improving aesthetics. The knife works. So for those of you not familiar with Wicked Edge, the 1500 grit diamonds is the last set of diamonds. You can get into ceramics, and I do have ceramics. I don't use them unless I feel the need to. Right after 1500 grit, diamonds, I jump into the lapping films. These blues are 9 micron. Then I go into 6 and 3 micron. So it's a glass platen with a lapping film. And at this point, after the 1500, you should really start to see the edge glisten. For new Wicked Edge users, if your stones are brand new, they need to be broken in. So it's going to take some time to wear them in. Don't be afraid if at 1500 grit diamond you don't see the edge polish, because your stones are still biting a little bit aggressively, and it just takes some breaking in. My stones have probably done 500-600 knives, if not more than that. Actually, definitely more than that. Probably closer to 1,000 knives. So at this point, you can see as I move and the light hits the blade different, the reflection on that edge. Another thing worth noting, the burr at 100 grit, 200 grit, and 400 grit is a lot thicker than the burr obviously at these fine stones. So right now it takes a lot more to feel that burr, but even still I can see on the backside as I pass the 1500 the material building up, so I know I'm apexed and I know I'm creating a even at least a microscopic burr, and I'm cleaning it up as needed. The goal is to end with a knife fully sharp, fully apexed, and no burr whatsoever. Sometimes if you're not careful and you're not paying attention, you get to the end and you think the knife is razor sharp, and really what you've left is a hairline burr, and once you break that burr off, the knife is actually not as sharp as it once was. It becomes dull. Not quite as dull as a heavily used knife, but not as sharp as we're intending here. On recurved knives and tantos, you got to be careful on the lapping films, because the change in shape of the edge, so it does a little swerve, will cut off some of the lapping film. And you definitely, well, for one, you don't want to cut off your lapping film because they're expensive, and two, if you were to cut deep enough, you don't want your freshly sharpened knife to hit the glass platen and then have to start over and fix the damage you just caused. So by now, as I move, should be pretty obvious of how polished it is. I'm hesitant to move the camera because it's on a vise, and I'm hesitant to move the knife because it's on a vise. So at the end of the video, I'll dismount the knife and show you the finished product. Just realized I said the camera's on a vise. Bad habit. The camera's on a tripod. The knife's in the vise. Switching now to the last set of lapping films, and then we hit the strops. When I do the strops, there you will see me go 1 and 1 simultaneously, and that's because you cannot do a back and forth rocking motion with the strops. The strop can only go one direction, so at that point it's easier to do the 1 and 1 symmetrical passes. Also, the strops aren't really removing much material at all. It's just refining the polish. So there's no concern that the strop's gonna shift my bevel over. So I did a couple passes with the 6 micron. I'm happy with what I see, and I switched now to the 3 micron. Unfortunately, these glass planings are a little bit stickier than my other ones, so probably not visible in the video, but I notice it. It's a little bit more difficult for me to move these. So I don't know if you saw something build up right here on the side of the blade. It's difficult to see the way the video was, but that is a piece of the lapping film that got cut off as I was passing through. It happens, it's normal, it's not a big deal. Just gotta try and keep from hitting the glass plate indirect, because if you do hit it, it can damage your sharpening job, and it means you gotta start all over. So at this point, I'm happy with how that looks. And now it helps if I'm on the same side. So 4 micron on either side, then I'm switching to 2 micron on either side. So basically, roughly, counted out 100 on each side. 100 on the 2 micron, 100 on the 4 micron. That's basically 50 passes per side. That's usually more than enough. If you watch other Wicked Edge videos, they probably do far less passes. But I tend to exaggerate a little bit and make sure my work is nice and clean, or at least to my standard anyways. So now I'm just wiping down the blade to try and show you guys. But there's the nice mirror reflected secondary bevel, so you can see it reflecting my colors. There it is reflecting the shirt and the tripod. Okay, now if I switch to the back side, you see that nothing really glistens too much, just a tiny little bit. So this big grind here, that's why I said it's a modified chisel grind. Normally a chisel grind would be flat, so it'd be this here, flat all the way to the edge. But in the Commander, they gave a grind there and gave a relief. It's a much shallower angle than the one that's on this side. You can see there, the big mirror, that's the chisel grind. If I get closer, hopefully it'll focus. Sorry, it's not focusing very well, but it's got a nice sharp tip. And you can see the back side. It's got a tiny bevel, just what we needed to clean up the burr. To give you an idea, and this is live, I haven't tested this before the video. So yes, you can make a chisel grind knife slice like butter. It all depends on who sharpened it. So there you have it. Emerson, and I forget the code right now, but it's a Super Commander. So received it partially serrated, heavily chipped. Spent probably 2 hours in it. Now it's better than new. No offense, Emerson. And it slices like butter.